Emotions, thoughts, and dreams. They flow through us as a current does in a stream. Their existence in us is fleeting, and yet they can be recalled. They can be shared, and they can be expanded upon. Dreams can feel as real as wakefulness. Dreams can play with our emotions. Dreams can evoke revolutionary ways of thinking. And dreams can become reality. Or maybe is it that the worlds we dream about can permeate our reality, crossing the threshold of thought into matter. It is in this transitional void that we find ourselves now. Take a deep breath. Calm your mind, relax, letting your reality melt away. Let go of everything you know about the world. It's time to step away from responsibilities and obligations, allowing your mind's eye to open wide and explore new landscapes with the travelers as they venture through the mirror, mist, and moonlight. Episode 1, Part 1, Bug Juice. On this particular day, the weather was fair and unassuming. Calm, you might even say. It always is before a storm. A small coastal town by the name of Emerald Bay went about its daily business, which mostly consisted of goods being loaded and unloaded at the docks, where transient ships ported briefly before moving down the coastline. The rest of the town was seemingly quiet. People didn't find much reason to venture out after the recent citywide installment of high-speed internet. Rewind back to the previous year and the city would have been bustling with movement on the sidewalks, in the yards, and in front of the local cafe. But now the cafe primarily only served as a location to pick up orders made online. The streets somehow felt cold, and it didn't help that roughly 2 out of 3 homes with front lawns hadn't been mowed since the high-tech update to Emerald Bay. If one had the ability to fly high above the town and look down into the homes, apartments, and cottages, they'd see humans and pets alike staring at glowing screens while glued to their chairs, couches, and beds, mindlessly mashing snack after snack into their faces. From the same aerial vantage point, one might have also noticed a single golden leaf riding in on the ocean breeze. Through its bursts of fluttering and gliding, the leaf told secrets of the ocean's invisible wind. Its small, unassuming presence overhead brought a message about the ensuing storm as it descended upon a small property just outside the town. With a few flips and twists, the leaf finally found a pocket of air that allowed it to settle and balance as it rode the final few feet before landing on a windowsill of an old cottage. The scene on the other side of the window was not dissimilar to many other homes, and at the same time, it was entirely mystifying and obscure. An oversized sofa, matching ottoman, coffee table, 55-inch Ultra HD TV, and generic houseplant for that little splash of ambiance gave minimal character to the medium-sized living room in the cottage. There were no pictures hung on the walls or attempts of decor, that is, other than the fern. A foyer lay between the living room and the front door. It was punched into the surrounding cream-colored shag carpet and consisted of 12 square tiles made to look like white granite. For a few hours at midday, a ray of light would inch its way across the floor in the direction of the white granite. As the patch of light on the floor traversed from one side of the room to the other, it would meet the front section of the sofa. The warmth that the light gave off was always well received by the cat who lay claim to the cushion in its path. Snickers rarely ever moved from that cozy location. It had become his nest, if there ever was such a thing for a cat. Even though he enjoyed the warmth of the light, he refused to move on its behalf. He accepted that half an hour of sunbasking brought directly to him was sufficient enough, and he need not disrupt his busy schedule on the couch of lounging and surfing through channels on the big screen. He'd gotten comfortable in his daily routine, and it had been so long that he actually couldn't even remember how much time it had been since he started, or what he used to do before. But this was easily accepted because the TV brought just enough enjoyment to him to last until the next show started. There were rare and mildly devastating occasions in which the TV was not available to him. Once the power had gone out during a storm. Another time, the owner of the cottage had overlooked paying the internet bill, and the service was temporarily shut off. In these moments, Snickers was faced with an empty feeling, which he tried to fill with snacks. Even with a full belly, he felt hollow. Soon enough, though, the TV's light cast artificial illumination throughout the living room, and the cat forgot all about the unsettling feeling he'd later identify as loneliness. Grooves in the grip of the remote control were a telltale sign of its abundant usage. It was an extension of his paw, and flipping from channel to channel was second nature. The show he frequently watched, about people and animals overcoming the odds, had once featured an individual with a missing arm. The human spoke of having something called phantom pains where his arm had once been. Although it was insensitive, Snickers often found himself grasping at the space between his paws when the remote was absent and drawing a comparison to the missing arm. Even though the remote was what he attributed his connection with, he sometimes found himself holding the thing and thinking it was something else entirely. There would be a moment of familiarity, and then the sensation would fade, as if it were déjà vu incarnate. A click or two of the remote button relieved Snickers of this itching mental burden. The thing about loneliness is that despite its intrinsic weight on the heart, it can be numbed by moderate distraction and stimulus, similar to physical pain. He was surrounded with distractions and stimuli. Despite his loneliness, he lived a life of leisure. Every creature comfort a cat could ever wish for, Snickers had. On occasion, he would muster up the strength to get up off his couch and enter the kitchen, so he could inhale some nibbles and bits and slurp water from his bowl. He'd return to his nest, only to rise again when nature called. He thanked the tech gods for creating a TV service that could be paused, so he never had to miss a moment of life-giving entertainment. The lonely cat was a European shorthair with a crooked tail. Stout-figured, although more solid than one may imagine, he donned a thick coat of fur that accounted for every shade of brown in the color spectrum. The brown shades were spaced in stripes, reminiscent of his great-great ancestors, back when cats and humans hadn't yet come to their current arrangement of convenience. He had cultivated an impressive stomach through his inactivity and constant snacking. When he walked, his fur swept the ground beneath him free of dust and crumbs. He was unusually proud of this furry feature. Snickers figured that if he were to ever get lost, all he'd have to do was turn around and follow the belly-swept path back to safety. The cat's tail was broken at the tip in two places, causing it to hook and curl anytime he'd get worked up. He didn't remember much before TV, but he recalled that long ago, a sliding window had dislodged from its open position and come crashing down on him like a guillotine. The shock from this encounter sent the cat darting across the floor and into the wall, which he forcefully greeted with his head. The collision must have scrambled his eggs pretty good. He figured it was why his recollection of time before the window incident was hazy at best. As long as he had his creature comforts, the loss of his memory didn't really bother him. Even so, the encounter with the window left Snickers sour on the idea of going near openings at all. He didn't trust him anymore and thought it much safer to take comfort on the couch. His human and master of the house was only there on occasions and never stayed for long. They had a mutual understanding. The master went about his business and the cat minded his own. He was good with this. No rent was ever due, and there was always food and entertainment available. Snickers had lived with his human for as long as his abbreviated memory afforded him. Their interactions were limited to an infrequent "see ya" and "hey" early in the morning and late in the evening upon his return. It's not that they disliked each other. The master of the house worked long, demanding hours from a remote location in town that provided customer service from a defective product called Any Odor. He was always too worn out by the end of the day to hang with Snickers. The lonely cat barely noticed anyhow, as he was always enthralled with his flickering rectangular light box. The cat had even forgotten his human's name and was too embarrassed to ever mention it. Hi and bye worked just fine, but if he had to guess, the human's name was Jeff. Or maybe John. It was definitely a J name. Jay's job was playing defense for a failing company's poor attempt at a product that claimed to offer fragrance on demand. The trinket was supposed to be able to replicate any odor anytime. After a few days of moderately successful smell replication, the trinket would start to blend all of the fragrances together, creating a smell that could only be described as total crap. Snickers had tried using Any Odor near his cat box, but was offended in short order after it started to reek worse than what it was intended to conceal. With the exception of a bad smell here and there, the house wasn't terrible considering how weathered the exterior looked. It was a humble cottage by the sea, set back a few blocks from the small industrial harbor for merchant sea vessels. Constant misting from salt water had weathered the exterior of the Victorian-style house that occupied a corner plot on the block. An oversized slope front yard framed the two-story home. Standing mostly upright, a flaked white picket fence overgrown with ivy framed the boundary of the property. The walkway to the front porch was blocked by a loose-hinged gate in desperate need of oiling. To the left side of the gate stood a wooden podium with an owl statue atop. Although the exterior appeared to be a destination location that Norman Bates would have liked to rent from an Airbnb, it wasn't a total heap. The inside had been remodeled to current standards. The door handles, windows, faucets, outlets, and other fixtures had been all replaced to meet modern standards. These were all updated after an explosion caused by a gas leak destroyed the old interior. Snickers was pretty sure it was a gas leak, but it also could have been a water pipe that burst or a kitchen fire. Anyway, there was damage, and then it was fixed. All he knew is that he had gone from watching a small TV from an old musky chair to his current life of leisure. Through the acquiring of new household goods, Snickers had gained an electronic food dispenser, a TV remote that could order anything with the press of a button, and a fancy self-cleaning litter box. Out of all the upgrades, he favored his new TV. It was a safe window into other worlds where he could be anywhere and anyone. His favorite TV shows aired on either the Discovery Channel or the Travel Channel. There was plenty of on-demand content to browse through too, but he felt that watching live TV somehow connected him to others watching at the same time. So to be part of the live TV experience, he'd watch the midday soaps, Judge Ruby, and other infomercials. On occasion, he'd even catch an ad for Any Odor. But the company that his human roommate Jay worked for was now pushing a new product, bug juice. When Snickers first saw this ad come on, he was confused at what the product actually was, as he was sure everyone else watching was too. Despite its totally irrelevant name, bug juice claimed to enhance one's senses, increase endurance, and generally make life better in every way. That didn't sound half bad to the lonely cat who was basking in the half an hour of direct sunlight the window provided him. The TV spokesman was going on about this elixir that would cure all of your ailments. It featured a main ingredient derived from juicing a particularly rare jungle snake of its oil glands. The marketing campaign was confusing. Although the product touted its magical properties to be made from snakes, its container looked like a beetle or a scarab, and it was called bug juice. The spokesman went on to explain all of the miraculous things his potion could do. Improve sleep, better than coffee, vigor of a lion, improvements in vision, hearing, reflexes, It'll even unkink your tail. That last one was oddly specific. The name Bug Juice, as it turned out, was not so crazy after all. The salesman explained that the diet of the snakes consisted of these rare exotic bugs, but it's only when the bugs are digested by the snake that the elixir is created and can be harvested. The bottle was made to look like the beetle and even came with an adjustable lanyard for easy access. "Keep it close for when you need it the most," exclaimed the spokesman. "Order now while supplies last." That night, Jay returned home later than normal. In passing, Snickers and Jay exchanged a silent acknowledgement to each other by nodding heads slightly. Jay left a trail on the floor leading to his bedroom, which consisted of socks, keys, pants, wallet, shirt, and computer bag. In the morning, when Snickers woke up, he noticed that Jay's trail had already been cleaned up. The only item left on the floor was, coincidentally, a full bottle of bug juice. "It must have been a sample that Jay got from work," thought Snickers. "I'll hold on to it for now." Snickers' day was filled with his usual routine of binge watching, broken up by intermittent naps, until later on that evening. Nosing around in the kitchen for something to munch on, his ears perked up to the announcer on the TV. In the background, an excited meteorologist rattled on about the unusual force of the ensuing storm. It was an infrequent sight to behold, but for some reason, Snickers loved aggressive weather. Counterintuitive at best, but it was what it was. The energy in the air, he supposed. It was about the only thing that could break the spell of TV and remove him from his nest: the concave pillow cushion. In particular, coastal storms can put on an inspiring demonstration of authority. The sky unleashes its tremendous power as if lightning from Thor's hammer was breaching the very fabric of space. A visceral thunderclap reverberates through the electrified air in commemoration of its counterpart. The portly cat sat atop his double-decker scratching post next to the window overlooking the harbor. He was enjoying the house's central air heating and glow from the television in contrast to the pounding wind and rain juxtaposed to his snout against the window. Despite his fear of windows in general, Snickers made an exception for a front-row seat to the theatrical light show. Chatter from the TV back in the adjoining room warned of the storm doubling down before the night was over. "Sounds like the show is just getting started. I'd better get some provisions," he thought. Any duration of sitting called for provisions. With that, he gracefully dismounted his post with a controlled fall. "Nailed it." Snickers made his way to the closet and pulled out a small hand towel. Carrying it in his mouth, he headed to the kitchen, where the pantry was located. He dropped the towel on the floor next to the pantry door and spread out all of the edges so that it was perfectly flat against the tiles. Turning his attention to the pantry door, he performed one of the only physically agile movements in his limited bag of tricks, to which food was usually the motivation. He jumped up towards the handle with a simultaneous rotation, so that his tail made an arc, sweeping from floor to door latch and then back to floor. Pleased with himself and excited to reap the fruits of his labor, he pawed upward at the second shelf, pulling off a small ration of catnip and 2 pouches of Mr. Mitten's Select Chunky Tuna Reserve. The feline placed both helpings into the towel on the floor and then carefully collected all 4 corners into his mouth. With his tail and his head raised up high, illustrating a sense of pride for the monumental accomplishment, he made his way back to the scratching post. Snickers made it just in time for the light show outside of his window to begin. Before tearing into his evening snacks, he thought it a bright idea to have a dribble of that bug juice. Carefully, he removed the beetle-shaped bottle from the lanyard hanging around his neck. "Keep it close for when you need it most," chimed the spokesman inside the cat's head. "Down the hatch." It tastes rotten and bitter, but also gave off an immediate sense of euphoria, so it was tolerable. The bag of Mr. Mitten's Select Chunky Tuna Reserve made a slurping sound as Snickers tore into it, which usually sent his tongue saliva into overdrive, but this time it felt more like a full-body salvation. "That elixir works quick," he noted. It didn't take long before the view outside of his window was generating bursts of joyous entertainment. Snickers could see the landscape of his backyard and beyond, each time the sky lit up. Some of the lightning bolts were hitting close to overhead, others were further towards the docks. He took interest in how the light was manipulating shadows. Most of the shadows in close proximity to the house were identifiable right away. Table on the porch, old swing set, trees, and that skeleton bush. The back porch lit up from a flash of light off to the side of the house, momentarily casting a small, long shadow, which Snickers was almost certain he saw moving quickly. The next flash, and it was gone. Shadows. How odd. What are shadows anyway? He inquired to the empty room. Geesh, I think that juice is hitting me harder than expected. No, wait! His fur stood on end, making it look like the lightning bolt had struck him directly. All of his attention was now focused on the foreground of the stormy scene. Without the lightning, the world outside his window was just one big black void. Snickers' nose was so close to the window that the exhaust had fogged up the glass, making it difficult to see. He potted the glass to clear some of the moisture away, just as more cracks of lightning fired off. Directly in front of him, pressed up on the other side of the glass, was a small creature with glowing red eyes. Boom, 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 went the trailing thunderclaps. The cat's blood ran cold as he clambered backward off the ledge of his resting spot, sending his munchies airborne. The lanyard around Snickers' neck trailed the cat as he plummeted downward until he stopped abruptly, midair, hanging by his neck. The bug juice necklace had caught the edge of the podium he'd been resting on seconds ago. The makeshift noose tightened as he clawed at his throat, desperate to free himself. Snickers' life started to flash before his very eyes. He didn't seem to recognize the imagery, but he was too frantic to care. The TV cast a taunting glow over the room as ominous flashes of light strobed through the window. All hope was lost. Part 2. Crimson Eyes. The world as it was these days favored the large folk. Buildings, streets, transportation were all better suited for humans. It made sense, though. Humans had the advantage of opposable thumbs. They held the hammers and pens. By pulling triggers, they claimed their territory and dominance over other humans and animals alike. That didn't seem to prevent Klaus the crimson-eyed mouse from doing much of anything once he set his sights on it. He had an insatiably adventurous thirst for knowledge and feats of adrenaline-inducing business alike. Klaus was barely out of his adolescence, but had sailed the seas, tussled with pirate pigeons, and even bested an elephant in a staring contest, to which he was sure that the elephant would never forget. Unknown to him, he was right. That elephant went on to tell all of the other elephants a tale about a ferocious mouse that had the power to paralyze with his daggered stare. It didn't take long for other animals to hear the tale of the mouse whose stare can freeze elephants and stop you in your tracks. The circus elephant told his co-worker, the bear who rode the tricycle, about it, and then he spread the word to the deer passing by. The deer told the birds, and of course birds don't know how to keep their beaks shut. With a chirp, tweet, caw, quack, cluck, and whoo, every animal from the great mountain cliffs to the edge of the sea knew about Klaus the Crimson One, the great danger mouse, and his penetrating stare. When the crickets got word of such a fearsome beast, they wrote a tune and play it each night to warn others of the danger mouse. In the fields and meadows, or on a branchy tree, beware a danger little, whose eyes can lock your knee. A chill run down thee back, though shivers you may lack, for now you's made of stone, stiff to the bone. His sash a crimson red, be flowin' in the breeze. Watch close, don't blink before him, for be the last you'll see. Word had made it back to Klaus of his notorious reputation. The lore of him had been embellished with each new iteration it underwent. Current legend tells of Klaus the Danger Mouse having piercing crimson eyes. He dons a red sash to match and uses it as a belt for his sword called Toothpick. It is said that his lean, muscular stature is like that of a large mongoose, with razor-sharp teeth, which drip venom and can induce paralysis in his prey. His dark brown hair, coarse and wild, reaching out in every direction. The reality is that Klaus's appearance is fairly unremarkable. His height was average, as was his weight for a mouse. He did have brown hair, but it was a light brown, not like the dark figure he was made out to be in the stories. It is true, however, that his eyes occasionally glowed red, but this only happened in the right lighting and in the dark places. Before the stories of the Crimson Danger Mouse became widespread in the animal kingdom, Klaus rarely ever adorned fancy accessories. But falling for some of the more iconic features of his mythical facade, Klaus soon found himself touting a red sash around his waist. He'd angle the knot to the side and place a sword-shaped stick beneath it, on the off chance that he needed to lean into his character a bit. He liked the imagery of having wild, unkept fur, so he'd rub a bit of boat grease through his tuft of hair on his head. It added to his growing, untamed persona, dangerous, with a bonus of added height. Despite the lore of the rodent being inflated and the ridiculous imagery, Klaus was, in fact, quite impressive. He'd always needed to learn fast, act fast, think fast, as is the case when growing up parentless on a sea vessel. To say he was alone wouldn't exactly be true, though. As a young pup, he was taken in by a mouse named Basil, who lived on the ship, which transported cheese and wine, among other things. The mice often enjoyed a variety of cheese found in boxes loaded in the cargo bay below the deck. Basil was a free spirit, so Klaus never had much structure or security in knowing what to expect next. He wasn't a bad influence or reckless, but he did leave Klaus frequently, ensuring the little mouse had rations of food that would last a day or two while he waited on the boat for Basil to return. The Nautical Noki was the name of the barter vessel. The seafaring ship was actually a merchant class, but just barely due to its smaller size. It would hop from town to town selling its cheeses and wines, or to trade goods. The ship only ever stayed at harbor for a few days at most. It usually would roll into port just before dawn and be ready to push off again by sunset. Klaus rather enjoyed the early morning when the light had just begun to infiltrate the blackness above the mist still clinging to the placid waters. Sometimes, under just the right conditions, Klaus could picture the ship's arrival from a spectator's vantage point on the docks. It must have looked as though the boat was gliding through the clouds and unzipping the mirror-like stillness as it rolled in, bringing with it the first uninterrupted wake. When he was old enough, Klaus would venture off the merchant ship with Basil. He learned how to navigate socially by watching Basil interact with other townies. But those days had passed, and Klaus was again on his own. He'd time his visits ashore carefully, and to take advantage of each opportunity. He would first and foremost find a local townie, introduce himself, and then ask if they had eaten yet. It was a game to him, with an objective of uncovering the best local eatery as well as getting to chat for a while. See, Klaus had become a collector of experiences. He did not discriminate from one experience to the next, although some he favored more than others. Klaus was happy to let his new acquaintances talk during these meetings, and took joy in their tales and stories. He'd sit and listen, munching on whatever food was recommended. At the end of the story and meal, Klaus would pull out a weathered doubloon from his tan leather messenger bag and pay for the whole spread, including a most generous tip for the server. He would thank the townie, who had now become someone with a name, for their time and company. Then he'd part ways on an appreciative note. Upon a return trip to a small town called Pebble Beach, Klaus reconnected with an old acquaintance who went by the name of Apollo. The two enjoyed their visits and enthralling conversations, so much that they were always sure to get together when Klaus made it to town. Klaus considered Apollo to be as close a friend as he'd ever had, with the exception of his uncle Basil. Apollo was a gray, coarse-furred badger with a bleach-white face and 2 black stripes painted from snout to ear which concealed his black pearl eyes. He prided himself on his philanthropy, but his trade and personal passion was crafting metal works of art. Artisan storefronts lined the main streets down by the docks. There was a shop that sold ocean paintings, a cozy bakery coffee den, a seashell-oriented jeweler, a toy store that had only sold kites. These quaint businesses were blessed with personalized artwork Apollo had donated to help draw in more business. The Badger was a master-class artist, known locally for his scrap metal sculptures. He would spend much of his free time cleaning up the streets, parks, and public areas. It was good community service, and he enjoyed scavenging for scraps of metal he could work into his next project. Even though Apollo spent much of his time voluntarily improving the neighborhood, he always made sure to carve out quality time with the family. Klaus admired the Badger for his obvious devotion to his wife and kids and respected his generosity. He'd become integral to the heart of the community. Apollo was waiting in the early hours of the morning to greet Klaus as he stepped off the ship. Klaus brought a selection of his favorite cheeses as a greeting gift. "Just you this trip?" asked Apollo. Klaus hung his head, not sure what to say. He took a few moments before looking up to meet the Badger's gaze. Softly, Klaus said, "He's gone." Apollo knew that if Klaus wanted to say more, he would, and it would be best not to dig deeper. Kid, I'm sorry." Klaus switched up the conversation. "What projects have you been cooking up lately?" The two critters walked in the direction of Apollo's hut as they chattered about what had happened during their time apart. Klaus spoke of his recent adventures, and Apollo boasted of developments within his community. The commercial district was a mashup of small businesses that catered to humans and animals alike. Apollo's home was at the end of an alley used as backdoor access to businesses along the main strip. The old-fashioned stonework of the street and warm tone of the few dimly lit entryways gave their early morning walk a surreal ambience. Overhanging plants on either side of Apollo's home offered a bit of shelter and security from peering eyes, both human and critter alike. Inside the modest space of the Badger's abode, Apollo had managed to cultivate both a rich living quarters filled with culture and comfort, and a respectable workshop for all of his blacksmithery needs. The small hut was cozy and warm, and it smelled of rich smoke emanating from the cobblestone fireplace. The fireplace served a dual purpose for both home heating and cooking, and his workshop needs. Beyond the fire and work area, every wall and surface had some element for the eyes to feast on. Apollo's wife Zora collected unique antiques, as uncommon as they came. A 16th century brass pocket watch hung on the wall. Not only did it still keep perfect time, but it had an added feature of showing the current phase of the moon. A collection of thimbles used for goblets furnished the dining room table, which was a slab of carved wood with an eerie tree knot shaped like a face. Keys, mirror boxes, locks, rings, pendants, and other small trinkets were displayed in a decorative manner throughout the house. Zora and the kids, Astra and Asha, had left early, about the same time Apollo was meeting up with the notorious Crimson One, to acquire a few essential ingredients for dinner later on, so the two old friends had a bit of one-on-one time to catch up at the house. Looking over a few of Apollo's more recent projects gave Klaus a new appreciation for the Badger. "It keeps the mind sharp and the body active, but surely I'm preaching to the choir," Apollo said implicitly. "I have no doubt. But I think you're mistaken about my level of artistic skills," Klaus replied. "Actually, I was referring to your storytelling abilities, or at least the ability to have stories told about you." A twinkle in Apollo's eye gave Klaus insight into what he was about to say next. It was here that Apollo confessed that the legend of Klaus the Crimson had reached him too. Actually, knowing Klaus, Apollo was tickled by the stories. He had heard about the mouse with venomous teeth and penetrating eyes. He knew about the red sash and the revered sword called Toothpick. Looking at Klaus in front of him now, Apollo couldn't help but be split at the seams with laughter. Okay, Klaus said. You've had your fun. Let's just sit by the fire and enjoy some of this delicious cheese I've brought. Yes, most certainly, my dangerous, adventurous little pal, exclaimed Apollo. Come to think of it, I have the perfect utensil for this delicious dairy wheel. Wait a moment, and I shall return. Klaus sat back in his seat and closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the fire kiss the side of his face. In such a relaxing environment, he quickly drifted off somewhere between the dream world and reality. He found himself half in and out of a void where he could still feel his body on the seat and hear the fire crackling next to him. But there was also a second place his mind was occupying. It was a familiar place, a comfortable place from long ago. He saw flashes of a human's bedroom. No, an attic with a bed. There was a mirror resting against the wall, and an old chest at the foot of a regal bed frame. The mirror's wooden frame, bed frame, and chest were all similar and engraved with curious markings. The mirror had a crack running from the top left to the middle of the right side, which split the reflection in two parallel images of the room he stood in. Klaus gazed into the mirror with entranced curiosity, for what he witnessed made no sense. The reflection of the attic was altered. The chest by the foot of the bed gave off a glow through the cracks where the hood met its body. It was dim at first. As he focused on the wooden box, he felt it pulling at him. Klaus turned his attention away from the mirror and into the room, then to the chest where he'd seen the glowing reflection. The illumination had ceased. Was it ever really there? He looked back into the mirror and, to his astonishment, saw the seam in the box glowing even more vivid. Its light filled the reflection of the room with a rich rose-colored luster, but the room he stood in was dark. A familiar voice emanated from the dark corner of the room. It's been so long and will be longer still. There's little time. We've gone through so much tribulation to deliver this message. Moonlight is the key. The keeper has forgotten of the mist set free. The voice and the attic dissipated as reality claimed his mind. An abrupt thud ripped Klaus completely back to his presence in the badger's hut. Directly in front of him stood Apollo, with a perplexed look on his face. Apollo was holding a sword in his right hand, blade down. The mouse's gaze moved from Apollo's eyes to the sword in his hand and down to the blade, where it had injected itself into the wheel of cheese resting on the table. I was trying to surprise you with this. The world-famous legendary toothpick. Ta-da! Why am I getting the feeling that you are already surprised? Or wait, no, not surprised, but something. No, there was a place I remembered, but now I'm not sure if it was a memory or if I was just dreaming, replied Klaus clumsily. What is that you're holding? I think you just told me, but no, it can't be. Oh, I just couldn't help myself, Klaus. I suspected that you may be walking around with some subpar piece of scrap metal of a sword, but it's far worse than I ever could have imagined. A twig? Really? Shouldn't the Crimson Danger Mouse, that drips venom from his fangs, have a respectable tool at his side during all of his adventures? You didn't, said Klaus. I did, Apollo exclaimed in reply. In fact, I got a bit caught up in the legend that was, well, you. Take a look, he said, pulling the sunken blade from the heart of the cheese. I forged the blade during the blood moon we had last month. It's a mix of my strongest and lightest materials, plus a little extra something I found. If you look closely at the grain of the steel, you can make out veins of a golden material I had laying around. Honestly, I've never made or seen anything like it. It's balanced and true if you don't mind me saying so. The hilt is made up of a unique wooden panel I pulled from washed up debris on the beach. Not sure of the type, but Jasper, who runs the trades down at the port, said it's called gopher wood. It had an unusual design, and I was looking for the right project to work it into. This one felt right. Gold and gopher wood. Klaus, you lucked out. Apollo, really? Stuttered Klaus. Yes, absolutely, replied Apollo with confidence. Do you really think something like this should be hanging around here? Take it with you and give it an adventure. Just one thing. What's that? Asked Klaus. Would you consider giving it a better name than Toothpick? Both Apollo and Klaus burst into joyous laughter. Thank you, my friend. I will cherish it and find it a better name. If I may, I noticed that the blade shimmers something otherworldly under the right lighting, like in the light of the moon. Maybe call it Moonlight? Klaus's fur stood at attention. Kinda cheesy, but it is sticking out of a round of Gouda. Moonlight, Klaus mouthed contemplatively. After a few moments, he replied, It is light years ahead of Toothpick. Moonlight it is, he exclaimed theatrically, pulling the sword from the cheese and raising it overhead as if to appease the gods. Or maybe just the face of the moon. Moonlight. It was the calm before the storm, and the sky was clear. The night held secrets tangled in the salted, cool breeze. The moon looked 3 times its usual size, and its brilliant glow wrapped the night in silk. Other than a gentle lapping of water at the docks, the sea was at rest, placid mirror to the sky. Reflections of piercing starlight sparkled into the dark, endless void, and the mirror world below the ship reflected its infinity. That night, the nautical Noki was no seafaring trade vessel. It was a starship. After a delicious dinner put on by Zora and a few thimbles filled with elixir one might have assumed fit for the gods themselves, Klaus had returned to the docks where his ship awaited departure. The Noki, now loaded with new merch, cast off from Pebble Beach, and Klaus the Crimson slept below deck in an empty wine barrel. He slumbered for a few hours before being startled awake, thinking for sure somebody was speaking to him. Unsure of what was said, or what he really heard, he decided to shake it off. The mouse grabbed his new saber and headed topside. Apollo was more generous than Klaus could have ever dreamed. He reflected on the kind gesture as he looked over the side of the spaceship into eternity. At this moment, time did not exist for the mouse. He brought his gaze back to the sheathed sword and thought it ironic whether he looked up, down, or at the sword, he was looking at Moonlight. Every detail was curated with the utmost consideration. The leather sheath was even stamped to emulate the design of the gopherwood shipwreck handle. He hadn't paid close attention to the design when he was at Apollo's, but upon inspection under the moonlight, he knew it very well. Klaus's Uncle Basil used to carry a leather satchel which also bared the same markings. He knew that satchel inside and out, for it was always strapped around his uncle's shoulder. He said the bag held many mysteries. Klaus remembered 2 golden buttons just under the main flap, and how he liked to fiddle with them. The buttons under close inspection donned the same cryptic markings. A time long ago, when Klaus was but a pinky, his Uncle Basil would carry him around in it. Even now, Klaus could remember the rich smell of Basil's leather satchel. In fact, he didn't need to remember very hard, because the sheath that Moonlight took slumber in gave off the same nostalgic aroma. Sliding the blade from its sheath was remarkably satisfying and smooth. The sword was energetic under the light of the full moon. Instead of the blade reflecting the light, it seemed to absorb it. Moonlight, the saber was radiant, enhanced by the moon's light. A faint luminance permeated the edges of the blade. It looked to Klaus as though the sword was drawing in the light from the night's dreamscape, towards its spine. It was still cool to the touch. Klaus marveled at his glowing counterpart for a few moments longer, then returned it to its sheath. He drew in several long, deep breaths, taking a few moments to gaze out across the moonlit ocean waters, before heading down below deck to rest for what few hours of the night remained. Window pane. Klaus awoke to an alarm sounding, and voices yelling from the mid-cabin. "Everyone on deck! Violent waters ahead! Batten down the hatches!" He hastily scrambled out of his barrel and up to the helm, where he could oversee the captain giving commands to the crew. "We're punching inland. Hard over. Wind's projected to be over 50 knots with possible microbursts. And major swells. Heavy rainfall. Low visibility. Temperamental skies. In position to lighten the load if need be." The glass window of the helm cabin showed only a light misting of seawater mixed with the small droplets of rain. It was not 5 minutes later that the boat was assaulted by a large swell and a torrential downpour. Klaus decided to stay on the bridge to monitor the worsening conditions. He grasped the leg of a control cluster as the ship shifted and tilted. The crew's adrenaline was palpable and focused. After a solid 45 minutes of vertigo-inducing swells, accompanied by blinding bursts of lightning and deafening thunder, the captain and crew exclaimed, "Land ho!" Although the conditions hadn't eased much, a shared sigh of relief broke the tension on the bridge. Resting easy now, Klaus the Crimson returned to his barrel, only to find that one of the hatches below deck had not been closed. As luck would have it, it was the one located directly above his living quarters. "Guess I'm not in the clear yet," mumbled Klaus as he stuffed a few essential items into a small messenger bag. He took a few steps towards the door before pausing to visibly sweep the room for anything else that might come in handy during the hopefully short stay wherever the Noki had docked. For a moment he hesitated, and then picked up Moonlight, secured the saber in his belt sash, and walked through the door. Klaus reached topside and realized that the weather had settled just enough for him to hightail it down the loading ramp that had been lowered to the dock, taking temporary shelter under an awning. Several crew members were standing about under the same semi-dry patch of concrete. "I'm guessing we'll be landlocked here till this whole thing blows by," said one crewman to the other two. "Go see if the captain wants to join us for a pint down at the old diner. Last I can recall, that place don't see much business anymore," replied the thinner of the three men. "If the beer's cold and the food's hot, I don't give a rip." Three bellowed out an agreeable chuckle. "Gunny, go get the Ro-Ro after checking with Pops." Ro-Ro, or roll-on, roll-off, is what the crew called the SUV they kept secured in the cargo hold for situations that called for traveling into town. Klaus had heard the captain referred to as Pops before, but knew better than to call him that face-to-face if they ever had an interaction. "Excuse me, fellas," chirped Klaus from the wet pavement below. "I don't mean to be a bother, but can I hop on the Ro-Ro with you? A warm meal is exactly what I need." "You're that freeloader from below, aren't you? What, you didn't think we knew you were there, always picking at our food supply?" lathered the round one. "Lay off him, Kester. Like you're one to talk," Shane interrupted, slapping Kester's gut. "You mean to blame the missing cargo on that little guy?" Shane knelt down and presented the palm of his right hand as a lift for Klaus to step onto. When Gunny gets back with the cap and the Ro-Ro, I'd imagine it to be no trouble. Shane placed Klaus on a nearby stack of wooden pallets, giving him a height advantage that wasn't normally afforded when speaking to humans. It felt more dignified. "Thank you, Shane. It's Shane, right?" "Aye, indeed it is." "Very perceptive of you, little one. And how about you, then?" "I'm the Crimson—" He stopped himself, feeling a bit foolish. "I'm Klaus." "Are you sure?" Kester remarked. Ignoring Kester, Klaus went on. "I've been traveling aboard the Noki my whole life. At least what I can remember of it. I try and pull my weight down in the cargo hold." "Pull your weight? Ha!" chimed Kester again. "Quiet you," Shane said in a tone that now hinted at irritation. "Take your roach problem, for instance." "We don't have a roach problem," Kester said, with Shane side-eyeing him. "Exactly. No roaches anymore, thanks to your unseen exterminator extraordinaire." Several minutes passed, and little more was said other than the acknowledgement of gratitude from Shane regarding Klaus's efforts aboard the ship. Soon enough, the three saw headlights illuminating the dock and exposing the heavy downpour that was keeping them huddled under the awning. The SUV pulled in close to the covered shelter. Shane offered his hand again to Klaus, who gratefully accepted the ride. The three of them got in the back, joining Gunny and Cap. "You mind if this fella tags along, given the circumstances, Cap?" asked Shane. "He'll not be a problem, I suspect." "I'll not be responsible for him or getting him back," Cap warned. Klaus replied, "I'll stay out of your hair, sir. Quiet as a mouse." The SUV pulled away from the awning, off the docks, and through the parking lot of the harbor. For a moment, a sense of relief washed over Klaus. Then, the vehicle hit a speed bump exiting the lot, making his bag fall, sliding off the edge of the seat and landing on the floor next to Kester's boot. Klaus didn't think the overinflated human noticed, but he didn't want to risk any other interactions with that crew member. The streets of the town were barren. A few incandescent streetlights lit the path for them as the rain continued to beat down on the roof of the rig. Klaus slid off the seat and down onto the floor. It was much darker down there, but he had a good sense of where to look for his bag. The brakes made a whining sound as they slowed the SUV down to a stop. A tinge of red light from the traffic control device outside illuminated the cabin of the vehicle, giving Klaus just enough light to locate his bag and sling it around his shoulder. Just then, Kester started clearing his throat as if he was working out something lodged in it. The red illumination from the streetlight turned green. "Hold up a sec, Gunny," Kester ordered as he opened the door. The rain on the street was louder now. Kester continued to make hawking sounds, followed by an unsettling discharge of phlegm. Clearing the obstruction from his throat gave him the opportunity to conceal the real reason he had opened the door. The husky crewman flipped the toe of his boot into Klaus's side, sending him flying clear across the door jamb and out onto the cold, wet street. The door shut before Klaus regained the wind in his lungs to yell for help. The Ro-Ro's engine ramped back up from its idle and began to roll away. Klaus wanted to jump and scream for help, but he knew it wouldn't do him any good. He was much too small to be seen in the rearview mirror at night, and under such rainfall. Several moments passed while Klaus processed his new situation. He was banged up a bit by the force of the hit, and his ego was diminished. "Okay. It's not the end of the world. I just need to rough it until morning. Then I'll make my way back to the ship. We didn't drive too far. Just a few blocks, I think. Find shelter, warmth, possibly food if I'm lucky," Klaus assured himself. A warm light from a window of a home on the corner of the block called to him just beyond the white picket fence. Lightning, followed by distant thunderclaps, reverberated in the open air. Klaus quickened his pace towards the house. As he approached the broken-down gate, another series of lightning flashes revealed an ominous figure standing tall above him. Instinctively, he burst into a sprint, putting as much distance between him and the owl he had just seen. Light flickered through the window as he approached the old house. Somebody's home, he noted, as he made his way around to the back. The home was in poor condition. Even at night, Klaus could see that. Paint was peeling away from almost every rotten board that remained on the siding. Ivy had overtaken the chimney and a good third of the exterior. More flashes of light and bass-heavy thunder. It was getting louder and closer now. The wind picked up just as Klaus reached the back porch. Finding that the door was boarded up was not a shock, considering the place's mode of operation. However, there was a single window pane just to the side of it, with a clear path of ivy trestling. He traversed the ladder that the plant provided, and took shelter under the overhang of the windowsill. Klaus peered through the steamed-up window, barely able to discern what was on the other side. Strobing, brilliant light from behind him exposed more details as he leaned in closer to the glass. A paw on the other side cleared the condensation away, and he found himself face to face with a giant cat. The cat was so alarmed to see eyes staring back at him just on the opposite side of the window that he tumbled backward off the elevated surface he'd been resting on. Klaus could see the top of the cat's head pressed up against the side of the stand, and it took a second to realize that he was struggling to get to something tied around his neck. The mouse's heart felt like it was going to leap out of his chest. His adrenaline kicked into high gear as he realized that the cat was suffocating. "Oh God, oh no, what do I do? What can I do?" The mouse turned around, hoping that someone else was there that could help. He was alone. Looking up at the sky as if to ask for guidance, he noticed that the clouds had parted enough to display the full moon. Moonlight! He reached for the sword and drew it from the sheath, intending to use it as a pry bar. But the sword had plans of its own. A blue flame burst from the center of the blade. Klaus almost instinctively tossed the flame away, but he resisted the urge. The flame burned upward to the tip of the sword despite the angle he held it. Klaus stumbled forward as he pressed the tip of the blade into the window, expecting resistance. The blade cut through the glass with such ease. He likened it to a red-hot poker pressing into snow. With practically no effort, the mouse was able to cut a hole, big enough for him to comfortably jump through. The edges of the freshly cut glass were still radiating heat and a deep ember glow as he passed through to the inside of the cottage. With an effective flick of his blade, Klaus freed the dangling animal who had just given into his fate, only to find himself falling to the floor instead. Lying on the ground, stunned at what had just occurred, Snicker's tail hooked and curled anxiously. What just happened? The feline gagged and almost lost his stomach. The vial of elixir laying next to him had broken, spilling all of its contents down through the vent on the floor. The lanyard had snapped at the last second. Snickers looked at the cord expecting to see frayed edges, but was surprised to find that they appeared to have melted. "Hey, you down there?" a small voice inquired from above. Klaus carefully resheathed Moonlight, placing it back at his side. The cat made a few attempts at responding, but choked each time. Instead, he made a motion with both his paws, placing them over his heart. Klaus understood. Later, he'd wonder why he didn't think to examine the saber right then and there, but his condition dictated the focus of his priorities. He was cold and wet and feeling sore from Kester's blow he had just taken a minute ago. "I'll take my chances," he thought as he turned back to the cat. "Can I come in?" The cat nodded as he got back on all fours. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm in a bit of a bad way at the moment, and I was looking for a bit of relief." The cat made his way to the kitchen with his ears turned back at the mouse. He found his water bowl and carefully lapped at the liquid inside. The cool water helped. Soon he was able to make a few noises which started to resemble words. "Hank, me." Clearing his throat once more brought his vocal abilities back online. "Thank you for saving me. I thought it was game over, lights out." I guess it's both of our lucky day then, Klaus replied. Wait, how did you even get in here? The window is always locked. Klaus paused for a moment, considering how the explanation of what had just happened would sound, then replied, Through that hole in the window. What hole? Questioned Snickers. Thinking as fast as he could, Klaus replied, I pressed on the glass and a piece fell through. It was kinda true. I never noticed any. The cat got quiet. Whatever happened, I'm thankful it did. Huh. That's kinda funny. I'm sorry. What about this is funny? Klaus interjected. Follow me. Snickers led the mouse over to his nest on the sofa. A long time ago, a defective window almost took my life, he said, showing Klaus his crooked tail. And now here I am again, my fate dangling before me, and a defective window is the cause of my salvation. Thanks to you, of course. I'm Snickers. Like the candy bar, Snickers? It's good to meet you. I'm Klaus. Like Santa? Snickers said, regaining a bit of his lightheartedness. Caught off guard, Klaus let out a snort, cracked a smile, and rolled his eyes. I don't get many visitors, but feel free to stay as long as you'd like, Klaus. Before long, the two critters were in deep conversation as they waited out the storm. Snickers explained that his memory was a bit incomplete after the head trauma from the first window incident. The first thing he remembered seeing was the TV playing an ad for a Snickers bar. Not remembering what to call himself, he assumed the name of the chocolate treat. Without ever having anyone to talk to, Snickers found himself rambling on about the things that mattered to him the most, TV shows. Although it was not the most stimulating conversation that Klaus had ever been part of, he recognized that the cat was passionate. Basil's voice echoed in the void of Klaus's mind. Passion is the fuel that propels greatness. He remembered hearing this many years ago from his uncle. The blackout. A few blocks down, a transformer blew. A shrill "Eek!" leapt from the cat's mouth. Klaus the Crimson produced a small flint and striker from his bag. "Shh, shh," sang the stone as the striker glided over the surface. The resulting bright sparks made it appear the lightning had moved into the living room. Do you have a candle, Snickers? I'll go look. Snickers didn't really need light. A valiant effort was put forth in the search for a candle, but to no avail. Snickers headed back to the living room with his tail tucked. To his surprise, he found Klaus sitting on the living room floor in the center of the room. A small saucer holding a candle with a brilliant flame lay in front of him. The flame danced and sparkled as it set shadows to work throughout the living room, giving even the plastic houseplant life. Snickers took a second to look around. He had never been in the main room before, when it was so dark and so quiet. It was kind of nice. Cheese. Gotta love it, Klaus remarked. Snickers took a few extra seconds to try and process the comment, not sure what he was missing. Did you want some? He asked hesitantly. Snickers chuckled. Always, but I was referring to the wax exterior of the cheese wheel I found in your kitchen while you were digging around in the back room. I rolled some of it up around a bit of string I had in my bag. Works pretty good. I have to be resourceful all the time, considering I'm a stowaway on the boat I live on. Really? You live on a ship? I have so many questions. Why did you leave tonight? What kind of vessel? Is it on the docks now? Can I see it? Snickers ran over to the stand in front of the window, hesitated for a minute, and then jumped up. He looked out across the blackness of the night. Rain was pelting down against the windowsill, splashing through the small hole in the glass. Klaus climbed up to join Snickers. I couldn't even tell you if we were looking in the right direction, Snicks. They could see the streetlights turning back on down the block. It wasn't long before the electrical grid surrounding the house jumped back to life. "Street lights on, check. House lights on, no check," Snickers remarked. "Do you have a breaker box around here? I always see crewmen come down to flip the breaker switches right by my barrel on the ship." "I haven't ever noticed one around. The only place I can even imagine something like that is up at the top of the staircase through the doorway in the kitchen," recalled the cat. "Well then, let's start there," Klaus said as he scooped up the candle, carrying it like a torch. They made their way through the kitchen and over the entryway leading to the stairs. Snickers stopped at the threshold. "I've never been up there. Gives me the creeps. Like the air is heavy and darker than it has any right to be." "Then we must enter the darkness to find the light," Klaus said theatrically. That was what Snickers needed to hear. He puffed up his chest and leapt up the first few stairs. Looking back, he said, "What are you waiting for, light bearer?" Klaus scampered up the stairs as they playfully raced to the top of the landing. There was a door ajar at the top, leading to the next room. Klaus darted through the slit, and Snickers followed after taking a deep breath. The mouse was standing a few feet into the room as Snickers pushed his way through. "So where do you think we should look first for the—" Snickers cut off, noticing that Klaus was frozen in place and his hair was standing on end. Upon entering the room, it didn't take Klaus more than a glance under the light of the candle to realize that he was standing in the attic from the vision he had at Apollo's house. Moonlight is the key. The keeper has forgotten of the mist set free. The world of Mirror Mist and Moonlight is vast, with endless possibilities. If you enjoy the story and you want to see it grow, you can help the travelers and me by sharing, liking, and subscribing. Thank you.